speed is one of the most important elements of warfare. Sun Tzu dedicated an entire chapter in The Art of War to it. However, for thousands of years, the actual physical speed of war remained virtually the same, as fast as the fastest horse. That has changed exponentially in the last century. It took Alexander the Great years to march his army across the Middle East into India, whereas in a major war today, any spot on Earth can be reached in less than a day. First, the sponsor, Cove. They sent me these noise-canceling Bluetooth headphones, and I gotta say, they're pretty cool. I actually just used them in the last podcast we did, and loved them. They are comfortable, lightweight, the Bluetooth worked up to 30 feet away, so when I had to run and grab a pen and paper, I could still hear our guests talking. They also have a built-in microphone. Battery life is another big point when it comes to noise-canceling headphones. My last pair seemed to always be dead. These last for 12 straight hours of use, or 200 hours on standby. If you use my link down in the description, you'll get over 60% off, making them extremely affordable for their incredible quality. So, go over, check out their site. You'll not only get a great pair of headphones, but it also goes a long way to supporting the channel here. Again, that's coveaudio.com/covert60, or just use the code covert60 at checkout. The world came into the 19th century moving at around 10 kilometers per hour on foot. We entered the 20th century at around 100 kilometers per hour with the dawn of the automobile. And now, the 21st century at 1,000 kilometers per hour with aircraft. That increase has been reflected in war as well as in peace. There are countless examples of speed being the decisive factor in battle. The term blitzkrieg sums it up. This was used famously by Germany during World War II during the invasion of France. France, along with their allies, had a relatively well-armed, equipped, and supplied army, which had entrenched and built up defensive positions along the border for years. But, despite this, Germany was able to completely negate this and conquer France, Belgium, and the Netherlands in a matter of weeks. The key to this was their speed and mobility. Aircraft, tanks, and vehicles always on the move, avoiding getting bogged down like in trench warfare of World War I. This is also something that the Soviets relied heavily on in the event of a war with NATO. The plan was to roll through Western Germany and into the rest of Europe as fast as possible, with massive tank divisions, mechanized infantry, heavy artillery, including rocket artillery, supporting, and helicopter gunships and strike aircraft to pave the way. They needed to make massive gains in Europe in a matter of weeks before the US and other allies could transport tanks, weapons, and supplies into the region. We also saw this again in the Gulf War and the invasion of Iraq a decade later. The US Marines are often called upon when rapid response is needed. Airborne infantry, paratroopers, and others are all designed with speed in mind. The ability to move and react quickly is key. It's also becoming more visible in terms of a technological perspective. Prompt Global Strike, a plan by the US to be able to strike anywhere on Earth in less than an hour, is an example. Hypersonic weapons, flying 5 times or more than the speed of sound, drastically reduce your enemy's time to react and defend itself. The US, China, Russia, and a few others, to a lesser extent, are all developing hypersonic weapons for this reason. ISR platforms, that is, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, like the planned SR-72 and possibly the X-37B, are able to be rapidly launched and gather intelligence at high speeds. Even slow-flying drones, like the RQ-170 and Russia's new Hunter B, even those like the Reaper and other similar drones deployed in larger numbers than possible with other manned aircraft, can provide vital information in real time and allow generals to make much quicker decisions. Some things haven't changed though. Aircraft are mostly still flying at the same speed as they did 50 years ago. Same with most tanks and missiles, ships, supply chains, etc. Without supply lines constantly delivering vital gear, equipment, and other materials, speed is useless and actually detrimental in a prolonged war. However, all of these have benefited from technology that moves quicker. The Tomahawk cruise missile, for example, used to take about 3 days to identify a target and program in a flight path. Today, this takes a couple hours at most, in some cases a matter of minutes. This allows rapid targeting and ability to hit time-sensitive targets that were previously impossible. Having battlefield awareness is one of the most important elements of warfare, knowing where your enemy is, what they're doing, and what you can do about it. Radio is one of the biggest advances here, enabling the ability to talk to your units and gather information instantaneously from miles away. Today, Data links and other technologies have enabled generals, and even individual units in some cases, to be able to have real-time access to everything going on, including audio, images, video, radar information, and more, and use that information to take action. While missiles have increased in range, they are useless without knowing where the enemy is. This is where other new technologies and techniques are needed. I often talk about, and you're probably most familiar with, optical imagery. These are what you'll see on things like Google Maps, and it's a very powerful tool that can give you incredible capabilities to identify your enemy. But another, less talked about, but probably equally as powerful tool available to the military is space-based radar imagery. These are radars in space, pointed down at the Earth. These have been around for a while, mostly to find naval ships at sea. In this role, they excel, as the black and white images they produce makes identifying ships in the wide open ocean incredibly easy, since the radar waves are absorbed by water, showing black, and only bounce off ships, showing up as white. While here they may look like just a bunch of white specks, military satellites are able to distinguish much greater detail, and even identify ships by their shape and wake produced, via automated computer algorithms. This may seem unimportant at first, but the ocean is huge. Being able to find your enemy out there is nearly impossible. During World War II, dozens of aircraft would fly out and search for enemy fleets, most of them finding nothing. And even if they did get lucky and fly close enough to spot their ships, they could be, and often were, shot down before they were able to relay that information. Aircraft carrying radars gave recon planes the ability to see much further. But as technology improved, the surface-to-air missiles carried by naval ships also gained further range. Space currently gives you the best ability to detect, and even, depending on your orbit and number of satellites, track naval ships at sea. However, even that's not perfect. Each nation keeps precise orbital information on the other's satellites. In fact, you can even look up that information for yourself. They know when each satellite will pass overhead, and can adjust accordingly. They can cover up and move aircraft to hide them from view, for example. And while you can't necessarily hide an entire naval fleet, you can do other things, such as change course, so the enemy would think that you're heading in a different direction, and then change back after the satellite passes. Another relatively new technology is to be able to shoot down the satellite. Several nations have already demonstrated the ability to do this, and these large recon satellites are expensive and difficult to replace, especially in wartime. Satellites need to be built, inspected, tested, cleaned, a launch vehicle be ready, all assembled, and clear weather to launch. If you ever watched a SpaceX launch, for example, you'll know how often space launches are delayed by weather. It's not something you can do quickly. So any nation losing a satellite could be extremely costly. And this brings up another point. Technology in general requires a complex system of sensors, computers, and operators working perfectly together. It's also extremely expensive. So whether it's a satellite or aircraft, tank, or individual soldier carrying high-tech equipment, losing even a small number becomes extremely costly in the terms of warfighting ability. The US, Russia, and even China to some extent, has many fewer air bases than it did 50 years ago. Less aircraft as well, less tanks, less soldiers, less ships, nearly less of everything. Some of that can be contributed to scale downs after the end of the Cold War, but a lot of it has to do with technology. Each tank, aircraft, ship, missile, etc. can do much more than their counterpart 50 years ago. But having less makes each one more valuable, more important, and the loss of one more costly, and could change the course of the entire war. The increased speed of war has changed everything. Because of this, decisions need to be made extremely fast to keep pace. But the added complexity and sophistication makes quick action extremely difficult. This has given the starter of a war a huge advantage. For example, a surprise attack against the US could not only catch them off guard and cause massive damage, but also it would be weeks, possibly over a month, before the US could mobilize and ready its forces to respond. During the 1997 Iraqi crisis, it took the US 6 months to fully build up its forces in the region. It takes a long time to ready and deploy troops, ships, aircraft, supplies, and the massive logistics needed to wage war. So, if anything, the increase in the speed of war makes the world a more dangerous place, giving the first to act a major edge over the defender. However, just because you can win the battle does not mean you can win the war, so deterrence is not dead. Either way, the ever-evolving and quickening pace of war will undoubtedly continue into the future.